We all know Hermione Granger ended up with Ron Weasley, but what if she didn't? So today we're going to marry Hermione off to every single wizard. And Harry is only the start. We're covering every notable wizard from Draco Malfoy to Tom Riddle, and we're going to figure out what each of those marriages actually looks like. Pure, unhinged wizarding matrimony from start to finish. Every major Hermione ship gets its moment here, and if you're new to fandom culture, shipping just means rooting for two characters to end up together. From the obvious to the controversial to the downright dark. Because the Harry Potter fandom has spent over 2 decades asking one question that even J.K. Rowling herself couldn't leave alone. What if Hermione married someone else? And before we get into this, let's address the hippogriff in the room. Years after the series ended, Rowling sat down with Emma Watson for Wonderland magazine and dropped a bombshell that shook the entire fandom to its core. She admitted that Hermione and Ron's relationship was a form of wish fulfillment, that she'd clung to the plot as she first imagined, for reasons that had very little to do with the literature. She called them fundamentally incompatible, and said they'd probably need relationship counseling. Emma Watson, who literally played Hermione, agreed, and she said there were fans who knew it too, and wondered whether Ron would have really been able to make her happy. So, if the author herself is telling us she got it wrong, the door is wide open. Let's walk through it. We're starting with the most obvious alternative, Harry Potter. The ship name is Harmony, and before Book 6 came out, this was the ship war to end all ship wars. Harry and Hermione versus Ron and Hermione. These debates consumed early Potter fandom entirely. Fan forums became battlegrounds, flame wars erupted, friendships ended, and people had to build entirely separate communities just to escape the toxicity of the shipping discourse. And honestly, the Harmony shippers had a case. Harry and Hermione share a deep, intuitive understanding of each other throughout the entire series. She's the one who stays when Ron walks out in Deathly Hallows. She's the one who always believes him. There's an intellectual equality between them. A mutual respect that doesn't rely on bickering and jealousy. The argument was never that Harry and Hermione had more romantic tension. It was that they had a stronger foundation. When Rowling basically confirmed that, Harmony shippers felt vindicated in a way that Ron and Hermione fans never quite recovered from. The scale of the Harmony versus Hermione war is hard to overstate, for anyone who wasn't around for it. At its peak in the early 2000s, entire fan sites drew lines in the sand. Archives that used to host every ship started splitting into camps, with moderators resigning over arguments about a fictional couple. Some communities were proudly pro-Hermione. Others flew the Harmony flag and banned anyone who disagreed. People wrote actual multi-page manifestos analyzing every glance, every touch, every conversation Harry and Hermione ever had, cross-referenced by book and chapter number. One particularly legendary essay picked apart Harry's jealousy toward Ginny in Half-Blood Prince, as evidence that Rowling had originally planned Harmony and changed course. Whether that theory holds water is debatable, but the passion behind it was absolutely real. When Deathly Hallows dropped and Ron and Hermione kissed during the Battle of Hogwarts, Harmony shippers didn't disappear. They migrated to fan fiction and built an entire alternate canon. In a world where Hermione marries Harry, you're looking at a power couple in the truest sense. Two people who understand sacrifice, who complement each other's strengths, who don't need to argue their way into affection. It's stable, it's healthy, and it's maybe a little boring, which is exactly why the fandom moved on to far spicier options. Because let's talk about Draco Malfoy. Dramione. This ship has no business being as popular as it is, and yet it stands as one of the biggest phenomena in all of fan fiction. We're talking over 41,000 works on Archive of Our Own, the biggest fan fiction platform on the internet alone. This is a ship between a girl who was called a racial slur and the boy who called her one. On paper, it shouldn't work. In practice, the fandom has made it work so effectively that Dramione fanfiction is now producing New York Times best-selling novels. Just recently, multiple Dramione fics rewritten as original fiction hit the bestseller lists. Senlin Yu's Manacled, published as Alchemized, a 400,000-word dystopian epic where Voldemort wins and Hermione is essentially enslaved, became one of the most widely discussed pieces of fanfiction ever written. going viral on Book Talk before it ever saw a bookstore shelf. Bridget Knightley's Draco Malfoy and the mortifying ordeal of being in love got picked up by a major publisher. This isn't a niche corner of the internet anymore. This is a cultural force. So why does it work? One word: enemies to lovers. It's arguably the most beloved trope in all of romance, and Dramione is the purest distillation of it. You've got the posh boy and the brilliant girl, the aristocrat and the self-made genius, the bully who has to reckon with the fact that the person he's been tearing down is smarter, braver, and better than him in every way. As one fan writer put it, the dominant, possessive Draco always has to admit that Hermione was right. And not only was she right, but he's in love with her rightness. So, let's say it happens. They hit it off during Hogwarts, quietly, reluctantly, in a way neither of them could explain to their friends. The war happens, Draco survives it, and on the other side, he's a different person. In canon, Draco changed a lot after the battle. His canon wife, Astoria, was pro-Muggle, anti-pure blood supremacy, and Draco followed her lead. Hermione would be an even better fit. She wouldn't just lead him away from his family's ideology, she'd demolish it entirely. After the war, they get married, a fancy Malfoy wedding, old money on full display. And every guest on both sides deeply uncomfortable. Their kids almost certainly land in Slytherin. Malfoy blood runs strong, but they'd be Slytherins raised by Hermione Granger, which is a terrifying combination for every professor at Hogwarts. Here's the real gossip. Hermione's crusade for house elf rights would hit completely different coming from inside the Malfoy family. The Malfoys had house elves. Dobby was theirs. Hermione Granger Malfoy campaigning for elf liberation while living in the house where Dobby spent years being mistreated carries more weight than 100 spew badges ever could. Now, if you want to take the Slytherin angle and crank it to maximum darkness, we arrive at Hermione, Tom Riddle and Hermione Granger. Yes, that Tom Riddle. The one who becomes Voldemort, but he still has his nose. This ship almost always involves time travel. The most common setup drops Hermione back in the 1940s, landing her in Tom Riddle's era at Hogwarts, where she has to navigate the school alongside a young, brilliant, deeply dangerous future Dark Lord. And the appeal isn't romance in any traditional sense, it's intellectual chess. What fans love about Hermione is seeing Hermione at her most cunning, her most morally gray, matched against someone who is genuinely her equal in terms of raw magical intellect. Can she change him? Can she pull him back from the edge before he becomes the monster we know? Or does she get pulled into the darkness herself? It's a ship that lets writers explore the side of Hermione that's controlling, that's ruthless when she needs to be. She sorted dangerously close to Ravenclaw and could have gone even further. In a Hermione marriage, Hermione doesn't soften her edges, she sharpens them, and that's terrifying and fascinating in equal measure. So how does it happen? Well, drop Hermione into 1940s Hogwarts alongside the most brilliant student the school had ever produced. Back when he still had a nose and a plan. Tom already had Horcruxes stashed away and was building something monstrous. Hermione, with her ambition and her need to prove herself in a world that called her blood dirty, might have been the one person who could keep up with him. In this timeline, she goes full Dark Witch, helps him build his empire, and ends up marrying, nose included, Tom, while the rest of the wizarding world pretends everything is just fine. This version of Hermione wouldn't even be out of character. She'd just be the same brilliance pointed in a very different direction. Speaking of morally complicated dynamics, let's talk about Severus Snape, Snamione, the ship that exists almost entirely in its own pocket dimension of fandom, separate from everyone else, and its shippers seem to prefer it that way. Here's the thing about Snape and Hermione in canon. Their relationship can essentially be captured in 4 words Snape says when Draco's hex makes Hermione's teeth grow past her chin. I see no difference. That's it. That's what shippers have to work with. And yet, a devoted community has built an entire romantic universe around these two. The common approach ages Hermione up, sometimes using the time turner, the time travel device introduced in her 3rd year, as justification that she's technically older than everyone thinks. Stories often place them together after the war, with Snape having survived, and the pairing leans heavily into intellectual companionship, shared trauma, and the idea that two people who are prickly and misunderstood might understand each other in ways no one else can. Is it for everyone? Absolutely not. But the wedding trope is weirdly prevalent in Snamione fandom specifically, which tells you something about what these readers are searching for. They want the domesticity. They want the quiet life after the storm. They want Snape to finally be happy, and they've decided Hermione is the one to make that happen. The wider fandom's reaction to Snape ranges from confused tolerance to outright hostility. And Snape shippers are fully aware of this. Most Snape communities are deliberately insular. Closed Discord servers, members-only archives, recommendation lists passed around like contraband. Part of this is self-protection from harassment, which has been a real and documented problem. But part of it is also genuine preference. Snape readers tend to be older, often women in their 30s and 40s, and many of them will tell you flatly that they find the dynamic between an older, emotionally stunted man and a younger woman who refuses to be intimidated more interesting than any of the age-appropriate options. The power imbalance is the point, they argue, because the entire arc of the ship is about Hermione dismantling it. Whether that reading holds up under scrutiny is another question, but the conviction behind it is absolute. Now, let's pivot to someone who actually treated Hermione well in canon, Viktor Krum. Krumini. Viktor Krum walked into the Hogwarts library every single day during the Triwizard Tournament trying to work up the courage to talk to Hermione. Every day. The world-famous Quidditch star, this athlete who had entire nations chanting his name, was too nervous to approach a 14-year-old bookworm, who at the time still had some pretty frizzy hair. When he finally asked her to the Yule Ball, he didn't see bushy hair and buck teeth, he saw her. And during the second task, Hermione was the person he would sorely miss, chosen over his own family and every friend he'd grown up with. Hermione. In a world where Hermione marries Viktor, she gets something she rarely gets in canon. Someone who pursues her without games, without jealousy, without needing to be dragged into emotional maturity. Viktor is straightforward. He sees what he wants, and he goes after it respectfully. The counter-argument is the age gap. He was 18 and she was 15, and the reality that long distance between Bulgaria and Britain would be brutal. But in terms of pure emotional treatment, Viktor Krum set a standard that Ron Weasley never cleared. In fanfiction, Krumini writers love playing with the culture clash. Viktor's broken English becomes a source of both humor and tenderness. The international Quidditch superstar who can execute a Wronski feint at 300 feet but cannot figure out how to pronounce Hermione correctly, even after she taught him twice. Stories often send Hermione to Bulgaria, where she predictably tries to reorganize Viktor's entire household within the first week, and ends up in a passive-aggressive standoff with his mother over the correct way to fold laundry. The language barrier works as a surprisingly effective romantic device. When two people can't rely on words, they have to pay closer attention to everything else. Viktor watches Hermione the way he reads a Quidditch pitch, studying patterns, anticipating movements, always 5 seconds ahead of everyone else in the room. Staying in that Triwizard Tournament era, let's talk about Cedric Diggory. Cedmine isn't one of the massive ships, but it has a quietly passionate following. The premise usually goes like this. What if Hermione, being Hermione, decided it wasn't fair that Harry was the only champion getting outside help? What if she started coaching Cedric? And what if those late-night study sessions turned into something more? Both of them are exceptional students. Both are fundamentally decent people. And the tragedy of Cedric's death gives this ship an emotional weight that few others can match. Time travel fics where Hermione goes back to save Cedric are a whole subgenre unto themselves, and they're often genuinely heartbreaking. What separates Cedmine from most Hermione ships is the stakes. Dramine and Tamine run on danger. Crumine and Geomine run on compatibility. Cedmine runs on grief and the knowledge that the clock is ticking. Cedmine fics that keep Cedric alive often wrestle with a fascinating question. What happens to a fundamentally good person when they survive something they shouldn't have? Cedric in these stories carries a survivor's guilt that mirrors Hermione's own post-war trauma, and their bond forms around the shared understanding that being alive when others aren't is its own kind of weight. It's a quieter ship than most on this list, and that's exactly its appeal. Two people who've seen the worst of magic choosing to believe in the best of each other. Now we cross into femme-slash territory, and the first stop is Fleur Delacour. Fleurmine, ship name, Beauty and Brains, which is honestly perfect. This ship has existed since Goblet of Fire dropped in 2000, and it's built on one of the most reliable shipping foundations there is, antagonism that might be something else entirely. Hermione spends a lot of Goblet of Fire being weirdly hostile toward Fleur, dismissing her, rolling her eyes, clearly bothered in a way that goes beyond normal annoyance. Hermione shippers looked at that and said, yeah, that's not irritation. That's a crush she doesn't know how to process. And they ran with it. When Half-Blood Prince canonized Bill and Fleur's relationship, Hermione shippers didn't even flinch. They wrote it as a marriage of convenience, broke them up entirely, or embraced polyamory. The ship saw a massive resurgence a few years back, tripling as fic count across fanfiction platforms in just 2 years, and climbing to the top fem/pairing on the biggest archives. In a Hermione marriage, you get glamour meets substance, French elegance meets British stubbornness, and two women who are constantly underestimated for very different reasons finding power in each other. Hermione writers also do interesting things with the Vila question. Fleur is part Vila, which means she has an innate magical allure that makes people act ridiculous around her. Most people either fawn over her or resent her for it. Hermione, being Hermione, does both simultaneously, and is furious about it. Fics that lean into the Vila lore often play with the idea that Vila magic recognizes a mate, and the comedy writes itself when Hermione, a woman who has built her entire identity on logic and reason, has to grapple with the fact that ancient bird magic has decided she belongs with a French supermodel. The indignation alone is worth the read. But what if they actually got married? The wedding would be a Franco-British event of legendary proportions. Molly Weasley sobbing through the ceremony while Hermione's parents do their best to act casual about their daughter marrying a part Vila supermodel. They'd probably adopt, and whatever kid lands on that household is getting homeschooled in advanced charms before their Hogwarts letter even arrives. Hermione would learn French within 6 months. Fleur would pretend not to be impressed and secretly be delighted. And then there's Bellatrix Lestrange. Bellamine. This is the ship that makes people do a double take. And rightfully so, because in canon, Bellatrix literally tortures Hermione. Carves a slur into her arm. It's one of the most disturbing scenes in the entire series. And yet, Bellamine has over 2,200 works on AO3. It's the most popular ship for Bellatrix and the second biggest fem/pairing for Hermione. The appeal is dark and genuinely complicated. Fans point to the parallels between the two characters. Both are brilliant, both are fiercely loyal to a male leader. Both are the most capable witch in whatever room they're standing in. Some fans view Bellatrix as a mirror image of Hermione, a version of who she could have become in a different world with different circumstances. The ship leans into intensity, obsession, the razor-thin line between hatred and desire. It's absolutely not for everyone, and the controversy around romanticizing a torturer-victim dynamic is real and valid. But the fandom has engaged with it more thoughtfully than you'd expect, using the ship to explore trauma, power, and what happens when two forces of nature collide. The way writers handle the power dynamic splits into two distinct approaches. In one, they rewrite the universe entirely. Bellatrix was never a Death Eater, or she defected early, or the war played out differently. These alternate universes strip away the worst of canon and let the chemistry breathe without the baggage. In the other, writers keep the torture scene intact and make the fic about what comes after: recovery, confrontation, the slow and ugly process of two people figuring out whether forgiveness is even on the table. Helena Bonham Carter's portrayal helped the ship along considerably, giving Bellatrix a manic charisma that the books only hinted at. Her performance turned a one-dimensional villain into someone the audience couldn't look away from, and Bellamine writers took that energy and ran. Finally, let's end with George Weasley. Hermione, I guess? This is one of the softer, sweeter options, and it's criminally underrated. George and Hermione have a genuinely fun dynamic in canon. She openly admires the twins' magical abilities, calling their spell work extraordinary. High praise from the girl who also founded SPEW, that's the Society for the Promotion of Elvish Welfare, because Hermione has never once done anything halfway. The twins were fiercely protective of her, once trying to physically attack Draco after he called her a slur. And unlike Fred, George is the slightly quieter twin, the one who listens more, which pairs interestingly with Hermione's intensity. The Weasleys' Wizard Wheezy's angle is where Hermione gets genuinely creative. In a world where Hermione marries George, she doesn't just marry a prankster, she marries a business owner, and Hermione Granger, The girl who organized a secret paramilitary study group at 15 is exactly the kind of person who could walk into the joke shop and immediately start optimizing the supply chain. Fics love the contrast. George inventing products fueled by chaos and instinct, while Hermione restructures the accounting system and files for magical patents he didn't even know existed. It's a partnership that works precisely because they operate on completely different wavelengths. He makes her laugh. She makes sure the shop doesn't burn down. And somewhere in between, they build something that actually lasts. The emotional hook for Hermione almost always centers on grief. Fred dies in the Battle of Hogwarts, and in the aftermath, George and Hermione find comfort in each other. She understands loss. He needs someone who won't try to replace what he's missing, but will sit with him in the empty space. It's gentle, it's healing, and in a world where Hermione marries George, she gets the Weasley family she clearly loves without the fundamental incompatibility that Rowling herself admitted existed with Ron. Now here's what ties all of this together. Hermione Granger is one of the most compelling characters in modern fiction, and the reason she works with so many different partners in fan fiction is because she's genuinely complex. She's not just smart, she's fierce, she's flawed. She's sometimes cruel, she's sometimes wrong, and she contains enough depth to credibly exist in a gothic horror, and Tom Riddle and a cozy domestic romance with George Weasley and everything in between. The fact that Hermione fanfiction is producing best-selling novels tells you something profound about what this character means to people. Fans love Hermione to the point of obsession. She's a character readers need to reimagine, to place in new contexts, to test against new partners, because the original story, as even as its author admitted, might not have gotten it right. And maybe that's the most magical thing about Hermione Granger. 25 years later, her story still isn't finished. We're all still writing it. So that's enough about Hermione's love life. Time to ruin Harry's. What if Harry Potter married every other witch? That's your next lesson here at Stickman Hogwarts. Click now before Hermione starts planning your wedding too.